She said she loved me the night before she left. No fight, no warning, just silence. Have you ever looked at your phone waiting for a message that never comes while replaying every moment in your head trying to find what you missed? I was that guy. The one who did everything right, loyal, kind, safe. And she still walked away. If you've ever sat in that kind of silence, where your heart screams but your mind can't make sense of anything, then you know. This isn't just heartbreak, it's something deeper. I used to believe love was about doing the right things, saying the right words, being there when she needed me. But what if everything you were taught to do is exactly what makes her walk away? There's a truth most men never hear. Not because it's hard to find, but because it's too painful to accept. And once you see it, you can never go back. So thank you for being here. And I hope you'll stay until the very end. Because what you're about to discover just might change the way you see every woman you've ever loved. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. Ethan stared at the coffee cup on the kitchen table, steam rising, untouched. It was hers. But she was gone, no note, no message, no goodbye, just a closet missing her favorite jacket and a silence that hit harder than any scream. He paced the room, checking his phone again and again. Nothing. Not a single word from Emily. The night before, she lay curled beside him, whispered, "You're everything I ever wanted." She kissed him like forever, but now forever was missing. His heart raced as his mind searched for logic. Did they fight? Did he forget something? Did he say something wrong? No, there was no fight, no tension, only warmth, and then nothing. That's what confused him the most, not the leaving, but the silence. Because when someone slams the door, you know they're angry. When someone screams, at least you have a reason. But when someone just disappears, it breaks something deeper. Ethan thought about her smile that morning, the way she looked at him, the way she touched his arm like she always did when she wanted him to stay a little longer. Was it all fake? No, he didn't believe that. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Because if it was fake, he could let it go. But it felt real, so real. And that meant she loved him and still left. That kind of pain doesn't scream, it whispers. It creeps into your thoughts at night, makes you doubt every memory, every moment. He tried to distract himself, went to work, hit the gym, called friends. But every minute alone dragged him back to the same place. That morning, that coffee, that silence. He looked at himself in the mirror, and for the first time he didn't see a man, he saw a question. What did I miss? Why did she leave? Was I not enough? Or worse, was I too much of the wrong thing? He remembered how she once told him, "I just want peace. I don't want drama. I want someone safe." And he believed her, so he became safe, predictable, steady. He answered every text, showed up on time, said sorry even when he didn't know what for. And she seemed happy until she wasn't, until she became distant, until she started pulling away, until her eyes stopped lighting up when he walked in the room. He ignored the signs. Called it stress, work, life, but deep down he knew. He just didn't want to admit it, because if he did, he'd have to accept that love isn't always fair, that doing everything right doesn't guarantee anything, that sometimes she leaves anyway. And that's where this story begins. Not with a fight, not with a breakup, but with a man standing in his own apartment, surrounded by memories and haunted by a single question. What if love isn't about what you give her? What if it's about what you unknowingly trigger in her? And what if that one truth changes everything? Ethan spent the next week chasing answers. He reread every message, replayed every conversation, analyzed every moment they'd shared, but nothing added up. How could someone say, "I love you," and then vanish? Was it something he did, something he didn't do? He found himself Googling things like why women leave without warning and sudden emotional withdrawal in relationships. Most of the answers felt shallow, generic, like empty comfort for confused men. But then, buried in a late-night rabbit hole, he stumbled across a name that kept coming up: Freud. He hadn't thought about Freud since college, some psychology class he barely remembered. But this quote stopped him cold. A woman does not always know what she wants, because what she wants lives in her unconscious mind. He sat up, unconscious. He kept reading. The article talked about how people, especially in romantic relationships, often act not from logic but from layers buried deep below their awareness, childhood wounds, past relationships, hidden fears, desires too uncomfortable to admit. And for women, these unconscious forces could shape attraction, emotion, even the urge to stay or run. Suddenly, it wasn't about what Emily said. It was about what she couldn't say because she didn't even know it herself. That idea hit Ethan like a wave. He remembered all the times she seemed happy, but also restless. The nights they lay in bed, and she stared at the ceiling long after he fell asleep. The way she'd sometimes pull away right after a moment of closeness. Back then he thought she needed space, or that she was moody. Now he wondered if her unconscious was already planning the exit long before her conscious mind caught up. And maybe that's why the goodbye never came. Because she didn't know she was leaving until she had already left. Ethan started to see her differently, not as a liar, not even as cruel, but as someone wrestling with her own invisible forces. It didn't make the pain go away, but it gave the pain a shape. And that gave him a place to begin. Because if love can be guided by the unconscious, then maybe, just maybe, the answers he was looking for weren't in what she said, but in what she felt and couldn't explain. He thought back to their last night. She laughed at something stupid he said, kissed him softly, held him close. And in that moment she probably meant every word. But something else, something deeper, was already pulling her away. Not because he failed her, not because he wasn't enough, but because her unconscious didn't feel what it needed to feel. And Ethan, for all his effort, never knew how to reach that part of her. No one had taught him how. He'd been trained to listen, to care, to communicate, but not to sense the space beneath her words, not to read the invisible, not to feel the shift in her silence. And that, he realized, was the missing piece. It wasn't about being a good man. It was about being a man who could see what wasn't being shown. That night, Ethan wrote in his journal not about her, but about himself. Maybe she didn't choose to leave. Maybe she was pulled by something even she didn't understand. And maybe, if I want to stop reliving this same pain, I need to stop listening to the words and start watching the patterns. It was the first time he didn't blame her. It was the first time he didn't blame himself. It was just the beginning of truth. If you've ever felt that, like someone left without knowing why, like you were good and kind and safe, but it still wasn't enough, you're not alone. And maybe you were never the problem, you were just speaking to a part of her. That wasn't the one making the decision. Have you ever felt that? Let me know. Because Ethan's not the only one waking up, and neither are you. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted inside him. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about everything he thought he knew about love. He started reading more articles, books, forums. Not the usual dating advice filled with cliches, but the stuff that made his brain hurt a little. The kind that didn't just explain behavior, but rewrote how you see it. Freud kept coming up, not in the pop culture way, but in the uncomfortable, shadowy version, the one that academics debated and most people ignored. Freud said something most men never hear. People are not always in control of their desires because desire comes from the unconscious. Desire, not logic, attraction, not reasoning, emotion, not promises. And that's when it clicked for Ethan. He remembered how hard he had worked to be a safe man. Reliable, predictable, available, the kind of man you marry. The kind you trust. But slowly, painfully, he began to wonder, what if trust isn't what her unconscious wants? What if safety actually kills attraction? He replayed their last few months together. Emily stopped asking questions. She stopped initiating touch. She stopped teasing him like she used to. She said she loved the peace he gave her. But maybe what her unconscious felt was boredom. It made Ethan angry at first, resentful. What more could he have done? But then came a deeper, more honest question. Was I giving her peace, or was I giving her nothing to feel? He thought about the way her eyes used to light up when they first met. How she was drawn to his edge, his unpredictability, the quiet confidence he didn't even know he had back then, before he tried to be perfect, before he tried to be exactly what she said she wanted. And that was the paradox. She said she wanted calm, but she was drawn to chaos. She said she wanted honesty, but chased mystery. She said she wanted safety, but stayed longer when things felt alive, not secure. Ethan felt betrayed by her words, but Freud made him realize she didn't lie, she just didn't know. Because her unconscious wants what her conscious mind can't explain. And if he was going to understand women, truly understand them, he'd have to stop listening only to what they say. He'd have to start watching what they respond to. That realization changed him. He began paying attention to the couples around him. The guy who made her laugh, then disappeared for 2 days, she kept texting him. The guy who never explained himself, never chased, yet she obsessed over him. The guy who didn't say, "I love you," every night. But when he did, she believed it more than anything. Ethan hated this truth, because it meant that everything he'd been taught to do might actually be pushing women away. Not because he was wrong, but because he was playing the wrong game. He started testing it, not by being fake, not by playing games, but by pulling his energy back. He stopped over-explaining, he stopped chasing closure, he stopped trying to fix what felt broken. And something wild happened. People responded to him differently, not just women, everyone. Because when you stop needing to be understood, you start becoming undeniable. You stop radiating desperation. You start radiating presence. And presence cannot be faked. Ethan didn't become cold, he became centered. He didn't become manipulative, he became unmoved, and that, he realized, is what creates gravity, not kindness, not logic, not effort, but stillness, intention, unpredictable calm. That's the man the unconscious responds to. That's the man Emily's heart couldn't explain but couldn't forget either. Ethan didn't blame her now, because he understood she wasn't cruel. She was just unconscious, and so was he. Until now, Ethan began to replay every interaction with Emily through this new lens. What used to feel confusing now revealed patterns. The way she lit up when he canceled plans last minute and made her guess what he was doing. The way her energy shifted when he was quiet, contemplative, not cold, just self-contained. The way she leaned in when he didn't explain himself, when he simply let the silence speak. Back then he thought he was being a bad communicator, but now he saw the truth. Her unconscious didn't crave safety, it craved sensation, not drama, not chaos, but depth, movement, the feeling of being pulled into something bigger than routine. Ethan remembered one night they were at dinner. He had just gotten a big promotion, everything was going well. He looked across the table, smiling, expecting her to be proud. But she looked distant, zoned out. He asked if she was okay. She said she was just tired. But now he understood, she wasn't tired, she was emotionally underwhelmed. He had removed every sharp edge, every unknown, every flicker of tension. He had become perfect. And in doing so, he had become invisible. Ethan never thought being a good man would feel like being a ghost. But that's how it felt, when you offer stability to someone whose unconscious craves volatility. He thought about what she told him when they first met. "I just want someone who makes me feel safe." But what she really wanted was someone who made her feel alive, not unsafe, not reckless, but emotionally awake. And that's where Ethan had failed, not because he was too nice, but because he was emotionally predictable. He never surprised her, he never challenged her emotional body. And in the absence of challenge, desire fades. He saw it in her eyes months before she left. A slow dimming, not of love, but of polarity. It wasn't personal, it wasn't cruel, it was unconscious. Ethan started noticing how the world teaches men to be soft, agreeable, constantly available, as if emotional availability alone was the ticket to a woman's heart. But that's not how attraction works. Attraction is not polite, it's not negotiated, it's not built on promises, it's built on feeling. And feeling requires friction, a dance between the known and the unknown, the familiar and the mysterious, the calm and the storm. Ethan realized he had made himself fully known, fully explained, fully accessible. And in doing so, he had removed the very tension that creates magnetism. He started remembering the version of himself she first fell for, confident, purposeful, not rude, not distant, just rooted. A man on his own path, not waiting for validation. That was the man who made her laugh without trying. The man who made her wonder where he was when he didn't text back immediately. The man whose calm wasn't weakness, but command. He hadn't lost her because he failed. He had lost her because he stopped being that man, not on purpose, but because he believed her words more than her patterns. Ethan finally saw it. If you remove all mystery, you remove all magnetism. And women, even the most gentle, kind-hearted ones, crave something deeper than peace. They crave power. Not domination, but emotional presence, not aggression, but steadiness, not chaos, but gravity. And that only comes from a man who knows himself beyond her mood, beyond her silence, beyond her tests. Have you ever given your all and still watched her drift away? Ever tried to be perfect, only to end up forgotten? You're not broken, you just gave her peace, when what she really needed was your presence. And if that's ever been you, feel free to say, I've been there. Because so has Ethan, and he's not alone anymore. It wasn't until Ethan started talking to Jordan that everything snapped into place. Jordan wasn't a therapist, he wasn't a dating coach, he was a friend of a friend, older, quiet, the kind of man who walked into a room and didn't need to say a word to be respected. They met by accident at a dinner party. Ethan didn't even want to go, but something in him said, "You need this." And he was right. Because halfway through the night, Jordan asked a question no one ever had. "You still trying to figure out why she left?" Ethan froze. He hadn't told anyone about Emily, not really, not in a way that showed how deeply it had cracked him. Jordan just knew. He nodded. Jordan leaned back, swirling his glass, and said it softly. "She didn't leave because you were wrong. She left because she didn't feel anything." That hit Ethan like a gut punch. But he didn't argue. He just listened. Jordan went on. "She tested you, not to hurt you, not to punish you, but to find something." Ethan frowned. "Tested me how?" Jordan smiled. "Every time she picked a fight for no reason, every time she went cold, every time she said something just to see if you'd flinch." Ethan thought about it, the mood swings, the silent treatments, the sudden drama that seemed to come from nowhere. At the time, he thought she was emotional, overwhelmed, maybe even unfair. "But now she was looking for your center," Jordan said. "She wanted to know if you'd collapse." Ethan leaned forward. "Why would she want to shake me?" "Because," Jordan said, "a woman can't trust what she can move." The silence between them stretched. It was like hearing a language he'd always known but never spoken. Jordan continued. "She didn't want to destroy you. She wanted to feel you whole, not just her, yourself." Ethan thought about the arguments. How quickly he'd try to fix things, apologize, over-explain, thinking it would show love. But maybe all it showed was instability. "She needed to feel your strength," Jordan said. "Not in your muscles, in your emotions." That's the test most men fail, not because they're weak, but because they think reacting is connection. Ethan sat with that. So many times Emily would cry and he'd panic. She'd grow distant and he'd chase. She'd lash out and he'd try to fix it with words. But all she wanted was to see if he'd stay solid. Now it made sense. That one night she threw a fit over something small. He tried to calm her. She pushed harder. He raised his voice. She shut down. And in that moment something broke. It wasn't what he said. It was the fact that she could move him. That night she stopped trusting him, not consciously, but deep down in the place words don't reach. Ethan looked at Jordan. "What was I supposed to do?" "Nothing," Jordan said. "Stand still. Let her storm pass. Don't explain. Don't argue. Just hold." That's when she knows you're not her equal. You're her anchor. Ethan remembered another time she cried over a bad day. He didn't speak, just held her, and afterward she clung to him like he was the only safe place in the world. He thought he did nothing. But that was everything. Jordan smiled. "Women don't remember what you say. They remember what they feel in your presence." Ethan went home that night changed. He started seeing the tests for what they were, not traps, but signals, not attacks, but invitations. He thought back to the last argument with Emily before she left. She accused him of not listening. He got defensive, explained for 20 minutes. But what if all she wanted was to see if he'd fold, and he did, not because he was wrong, but because he couldn't hold her emotion without losing his own. That night, Ethan made a promise to himself. Next time, he wouldn't chase her calm, he'd become his own. Because when a man becomes the place she can fall apart, without him falling apart too, that's when she finally feels safe. Not because he saved her, but because he didn't lose himself. And that is the moment she stops testing, because she's finally found something solid. Have you ever felt like she was trying to break you? What if she was trying to find where you do break if that landed somewhere in your chest? You're not alone. And this story is not over. Ethan started seeing the patterns everywhere, at work, in the subway, on his phone, not just in his own story but in others. He noticed the guy who replied instantly to every text, always available, always explaining, and the woman on the other end slowly drifting. Then there was the man who didn't say much, who never chased but moved with purpose. Women leaned in when he spoke. They watched him when he didn't. Ethan began to understand what Jordan meant by emotional gravity. It wasn't about being mysterious for show. It was about not needing to be known completely. Because mystery isn't confusion. It's energy withheld, not because you're playing games, but because you're grounded. And that pulls people in. He started applying it in small ways. He waited before answering texts, not to be rude, but to break the habit of overgiving. He stopped over-explaining his thoughts, stopped filling silences with nervous words. He let things breathe. And in that space, something new happened. People leaned closer, conversations felt deeper. Even his own presence felt heavier, like he was carrying less but holding more. He remembered Emily once asking him, half joking, "What are you thinking?" And back then he would spill everything, every thought, every feeling, thinking vulnerability meant sharing all. But now he realized vulnerability isn't about exposure. It's about being seen without needing to be understood, and that is magnetic. He started seeing why the man who replies late sometimes, who doesn't chase validation, who doesn't explain when she pushes, that man isn't cold. He's confident. He creates emotional tension, not by withholding love, but by not needing constant reassurance. That tension activates something ancient in the feminine. A need to reach, to feel, to chase, not in desperation, but in desire. Ethan looked back and saw the moments Emily was most alive, most affectionate, most drawn in. It was when he wasn't trying to win her. It was when he was just being himself, fully, not filtered, not softened. Just present, that's the paradox. The more you try to be emotionally available 24/7, the more invisible you become, not because women don't value openness, but because constant availability removes contrast. And contrast is what creates feeling. Think about music. It's not the sound that moves you, it's the space between the notes. It's not the sunlight that makes a moment beautiful, it's the shadow beside it. Ethan started to embody that, not as a trick, not as a tactic, but because he finally understood. Presence speaks louder than performance, and energy is more truthful than words. That's why she misses the man who didn't say much. That's why she chases the one who doesn't need her attention to feel whole. Because uncertainty creates gravity, and gravity pulls the emotional body in, not just hers, everyone's. Ethan felt it in himself too. The people he respected most weren't the loudest. They were the ones who carried stillness like armor, not because they didn't feel, but because they didn't leak. That was the difference. He used to overflow, now he contained, and in that containment women felt safe to unfold, not because he promised anything, but because he didn't need to. Have you ever been told you're too nice? Maybe the real issue is that you're too available, not just with time, but with energy, with emotion, with your need to be seen. Start pulling that energy back, not to punish but to protect your gravity. Because when she has to reach, she remembers your weight. And that is when the real attraction begins. Ethan didn't plan to see her again. But life, in its strange rhythm, has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It was a random Thursday, a cold breeze sweeping through the city. He was leaving a cafe when he saw her across the street. Emily, she hadn't changed much. Same coat. Same way of brushing her hair behind her ear when nervous. She saw him. Their eyes locked. There was no drama, no music playing in the background, just a long, heavy silence. Then she crossed the street. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied. No one flinched, no one ran, just two people standing still. They sat down nearby, a park bench. The kind they used to walk past 100 times without noticing. Now it felt like a stage. She started talking about her new job, her apartment, how things had been hard lately. Ethan listened. But he didn't lean in with sympathy. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix. He just listened with presence, not performance. And she felt it. She kept looking at him, pausing mid-sentence, like she didn't know who he had become. He hadn't said much. But his silence said everything. She tested the water subtly, told a story that used to make him jealous, mentioned a guy she had dated. Ethan nodded. No change in breath, no shift in posture, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't collapse. She noticed, her tone softened, and then came the storm. "You just disappeared," she said, "like you didn't even try." That was the trap, the bait, the moment where the old Ethan would have jumped in to explain, apologize, defend. But this Ethan, he just breathed. "I didn't disappear," he said. "I just stopped chasing what didn't want to be held." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the old cracks, the eagerness, the soft spots. They weren't there. And something shifted in her. She wasn't angry, she was disarmed. Because when a woman throws chaos and the man remains calm, her unconscious finally exhales. She started crying, not loud, not theatrical, just quiet tears, like the part of her that had waited to feel safe finally landed. Ethan didn't move. He didn't reach to fix her. He let the storm pass through her while holding his own center, and that is when she touched his arm, not to demand, but to return. Because the feminine doesn't follow the loudest man, she follows the calmest, not the one who overpromises, but the one who doesn't break under pressure. That day, Ethan didn't say much, but everything changed, not because he had a plan, but because he had a presence, one she could lean into without losing herself. And for the first time, she looked at him not as a question, but as a place. He wasn't trying to lead her back, he was just leading himself. And she followed, not with words, but with energy, because a woman doesn't always know what she wants, but she knows how she feels around a man who knows himself. And that speaks louder than any "I love you." Have you ever felt that shift, where you didn't say anything, but everything changed? Where her chaos calmed, not because you fixed it, but because you did flinch. If that moment has found you, remember it, because that is when you become the anchor. Ethan walked away from that bench feeling lighter, not because something was resolved, but because nothing needed to be. He didn't need her back. He didn't need closure. He didn't even need to understand every emotion she threw at him. What he needed was finally clear. To stay grounded in himself, even when her energy pulled in every direction. And that he had done, but the clarity came with something else. A quiet grief, not for the loss of Emily, but for the version of himself he used to be, the man who begged, who explained, who twisted himself into knots just to make someone stay. He missed that version, not because he wanted to return to him, but because he finally had compassion for him. The younger Ethan, the one who believed love was earned through sacrifice, deserved a goodbye. And so he gave it in silence, in breath, in reflection. He started journaling again, not out of pain but presence. He wrote, "I no longer need to be understood to feel whole." That sentence echoed, because it wasn't just about women. It was about everything: friends who ghosted, family who never quite got him, bosses who overlooked him. He had spent his life trying to translate his value into words others could grasp. But now he simply became it, not loudly, not proudly, but in the way a mountain doesn't need to announce its height. Ethan began to observe more than react. He listened more than explained. He breathed deeper when tested. And the world responded differently. Some people pulled away, but others leaned in, not because he was trying harder, but because he wasn't trying at all. His presence had weight now, not arrogance, but stillness, and that is rare. One evening, months later, he sat at a rooftop bar with a new woman, Sophia. She was vibrant, intelligent, curious. At one point, she asked him directly, "So what are you looking for?" He smiled. "I'm not looking, I'm leading. If it aligns, it stays." She paused, then smiled back, not because it was a line, but because it was a truth. That's when Ethan realized you don't attract what you chase. You attract what you embody. And the more he embodied grounded strength, the less chaos he invited, even when tests came, because they still did. He didn't waver, and women felt it. Some left quickly, not because he failed the test, but because they weren't ready for a man who couldn't be shaken. Others stayed, drawn not to the mystery, but to the clarity he carried in silence. Because understanding the feminine unconscious isn't about control, it's about compassion. Not weakness, but awareness. He stopped labeling women as crazy or confusing. He started seeing them as mirrors, their chaos reflecting where he once had none, their shifts exposing where he once lacked structure. And when you stop blaming the storm, you start learning how to sail. That's what Ethan had done. He didn't conquer women, he understood their rhythm. He didn't need to manipulate, he mastered himself. And in doing so, he saw them clearly for the first time. Not as puzzles to solve, but as energy to witness. And when you witness without losing your center, you give her the space to drop her shield, because that's the paradox. The less you try to fix her, the more she feels safe to unfold. Ethan didn't become invincible, he became invisible to drama. And in that space, the right woman didn't have to chase intensity. She could finally rest, not in him, but beside him. That's the kind of presence the world forgets to teach. But the kind that changes everything. Ethan didn't expect to hear from Emily again. But months later, his phone buzzed with a name he once would have dropped everything for. Now he just looked at it. No rush of adrenaline, no racing heart, just stillness. He waited a moment, then opened the message. It wasn't dramatic, just 4 words. "Do you want coffee?" A year ago, he would have overthought every letter. Now he simply responded, "Sure." They met at a quiet spot downtown. Same city, different energy. She sat down across from him, studying him like she wasn't sure if this was the same man she once left. He wasn't. And she could feel it. They talked casually like old friends. No tension, no expectation. She asked about his life. He shared it briefly but didn't overshare. He asked nothing about hers, not because he didn't care, but because he no longer needed answers. That alone made her lean in. She talked about her mistakes. How she'd chased men who triggered her emotions but couldn't hold space for them. How she thought safety was boring until she realized danger didn't offer peace. Ethan nodded. But he didn't offer comfort. He didn't say, "I understand." He simply listened, anchored. And the more silent he was, the more she unfolded. Then she said something that stayed with him. "You were always there for me, but I couldn't feel you." That landed deep. Because now he was there fully. Not because he needed her, but because he no longer abandoned himself. She asked if he was seeing anyone. He smiled. Yes. Sophia, it wasn't a declaration, just a truth, and Emily paused, a flicker of sadness past her eyes, but then she smiled. "I'm glad," she said, and she meant it, because something about him now demanded honesty, not through pressure, but through presence. They parted ways with no promises, no illusions, just peace. Ethan walked away, not with a full heart, but a clean one, not proud, just whole, because true power isn't in getting someone back. It's in knowing you don't need to. Later that week, Sophia asked him, "Do you ever think about her?" Ethan didn't lie, sometimes. "But I don't miss her. I miss the man I used to become around her." Sophia didn't get insecure, she just smiled, because she knew Ethan had outgrown that version. He didn't become colder, he became cleaner, clearer. Rooted. And now, women didn't enter his life to complete him. They aligned with him or didn't stay. That was the difference. He didn't chase energy anymore. He moved with it. And the more he stood in his truth, the more the wrong ones disappeared. And the right one didn't need to be chased. Because gravity doesn't scream. It pulls. Ethan had become gravity. Not for every woman. Just for the one who could feel him without needing him to prove anything. That's how you stop performing. That's how you stop being forgotten. You stop needing to be chosen, and you start being remembered, not because you said the right thing, but because you became the man her unconscious couldn't ignore. And when that happens, you no longer seek validation, you become it. Ethan stood at the edge of the lake, not for the view, not for the photo, but for the stillness. It had become a habit, coming here at dawn before the city woke up. The water didn't speak, but it taught him everything, because that's how presence works. It doesn't rush, it doesn't explain, it just exists with weight. Ethan had become that kind of man, not by chasing discipline, but by releasing distraction. He no longer woke up wondering what others thought. He no longer sought validation in her moods. He didn't wait for messages to feel worthy. He didn't chase silence hoping it meant something deeper. He simply listened. Not to her words, but to his own energy. There were moments he still felt the pull, the old urge to explain, to please, to soften his edges. But now he recognized it for what it was, a ghost. A reflex of a man who once believed love required him to disappear. But Ethan no longer disappeared, he remained fully in his truth, in his decisions, in his stillness. That's what Sophia loved most about him, not that he was perfect, but that he was consistent, not in action. But in essence, she once told him, "I feel like I can fall apart around you." And he simply replied, "Because I won't." That was the gift he had learned to give, not comfort, but containment, not solutions, but strength, not attention, but presence. And when you carry that presence, you stop being an option, you become a foundation. That's why Sophia never played games. She didn't need to, because his energy didn't demand her to prove anything. It just invited her to rest. And that was new for her, just like it had been new for Ethan. He no longer blamed women for being emotional. He no longer resented their confusion. He no longer feared their silence, because he knew it was never about them. It was about his response to them. And when he stopped reacting, he started leading, quietly, naturally, without forcing, without performing. That's when peace found him, not as a prize, but as a reflection. The storm had never been her. It had always been the part of him that didn't know how to hold the wind. Now he held it. And it didn't shake him. That's the moment the game ends, not because you won, but because you stopped playing. Because when you become the calm, the chaos loses interest. The drama can't survive. And the right people, they don't test your peace, they protect it. Ethan took one last look at the water, still, unbothered, just like him. And in that reflection, he didn't see the man who was left behind. He saw the man who never moved. And that is who she remembers, not the one who chased, but the one who stayed still. If you've made it this far, you're not who you were. And that silence in your chest, that's not emptiness. That's power. Stay there. SEO and thumbnail D, letter 1B0, letter 1EDB. I day la PH letter 1A7N, SEO T letter 1ED1. IUVAP prompt T letter 1EA1 O hin letter 1EA3 and H thur and H letter 1ECF. Thumbnail Theo Dung Yero C letter 1EA7U. Magnifying glass tilted left SEO optimization direct hit title. SEO optimized, dramatic, clear. In this powerful, emotional journey, we follow Ethan's awakening as he uncovers the truth Freud warned us about, and how mastering his presence changed everything. If you've ever loved and lost without reason, this is the clarity you've been waiting for. Fire hashtags. Unconscious attraction, men and women, masculine presence, relationship truths, emotional strength, Freud, wisdom, stop chasing, modern masculinity, key SEO keywords. 3-tier, tier 1. Relationships, dating psychology, emotional intelligence, tier 2. Women's behavior, masculine energy, understanding women, tier 3. Why women lose interest, female unconscious mind, emotional gravity. How to be the man she respects, artist palette, thumbnail, image, prompt, English. Prompt for image gene. Ration, create a 16:9 YouTube thumbnail image with a dramatic red-toned background. In the foreground, show 3 main characters. A man with a calm but emotionally intense expression, a woman looking away with confusion and tears in her eyes, and another woman in the background watching him with admiration. The man's face should be centered, serious, powerful, and emotionally magnetic. Use cinematic lighting with dramatic contrast. Add bold, striking subheadline text in English. She does even know why she left. Make the title pop with strong, clean font. Faces should be expressive and detailed to reflect emotional tension and depth. The overall vibe should feel intense, thought-provoking, and deeply personal. Use lots of red, black, and subtle gold accents for depth and richness. Make it psychologically charged and visually gripping.